Good morning, everybody. I'm back for episode 2 of how I make my bread. I will apologize in advance. My children are awake this time, so you may hear them cut into the video. Be that as it may. Okay, so what we did last night, just to rehash, was we made a starter, which was basically a pinch of yeast. It was 200 grams of bread flour and 175 grams of bottled water. That has fermented. I don't know how close in you can get. You can see some little bubbles. But anyway, that's doing what it's supposed to do. I would ordinarily let that ferment about 12 hours before I did anything with it, but it looks like it's ready to go. It's been cooking about 8 hours, I guess, at this point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my large mixing bowl, and I'm going to put it on my scale. I'm going to draw the scale out here so you can see. I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to zero it out. It's set to metric. All right, we're ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out the water. Now, this is to make a loaf that will go in this 6-quart baker. So it's kind of scaled for that. You might need to scale yours up or down a little bit. So, you know, we can play with those numbers. If you've got a question, you can shoot a question to the video.
I got answer. On the back of this.
So for my final dough, I'm going to maintain that 75% water to flour ratio by weight. So for this final dough addition, I'm going to start by adding 300 grams of spring water to my big bowl. Not quite there. And again, if you don't get it right on the money, within a couple grams one way or the other is fine. This is pretty forgiving. There's 300 grams of water. The next thing, pour this while we let the cat in, before it flaws a hole in the door. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my starter. Now I'm going to add half of this. And remember, let me bring it over here where it's easier to see. I'm going to add half of this, and according to the recipe we made last night, this was 200 grams of flour, 150 grams of water. So we're going to basically take, let me see if I can do the math in my head. We're going to take 100 grams of flour out of it, and we're going to take 75 grams of water, so that gives us 175 grams total mass that we're pulling out of this starter. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my handy little scraper here. I'm going to actually wet it so the dough doesn't stick to it too badly. I'm going to zero that out. It's ready to go. I'm just going to take my scraper. This is not a super scientific process. I'm just going to drop that in. 108. 176. That's good enough for me. Okay, so that's the first step I'm going to do. The second step I like to do, I'm going to pull this off the scale for a minute. This dough has got little bits of yeast in it, and I find my bread does a little better if the water that's ultimately mixed with the fresh flour has kind of been contaminated with some of that yeast. So the next thing I like to do is I take my dough scraper. You know, you could do this with your hands, and I kind of just chop this up and let I don't know if you can see the water getting kind of cloudy, but that's going to be a little mix of flour and some yeast particles. I find it helps the bread get going. Now, all right, next step. Put this back on. My next step is I'm going to add salt. And the way I figure the salt is it needs to be about 1.5 to 1.8% of the weight of the total flour in this recipe. So this is already got 100 grams of flour in it from the starter. It's going to get 400 grams more flour to make the final dough, so that's 500 grams. So 2% of that is a little less than 10 grams, so 7 to 8, 9 grams. You can kind of adjust that taste. It's got to have salt or it's going to be real bland. And I've already ground some salt. I'm going to just spritz that in until my scale says I've got 8 grams of it. That's about right. Okay. Let me give that little swirl just to get it kind of incorporated. Keep in mind yeast slows down, or the salt slows down the yeast activity a little bit. So that can be you can use salt content as a little bit of a moderator. Okay, last addition. It's going to be 400 grams of bread flour. I'm just going to dump this in on top. $21, $3.23, $3.98, $400. All right, now the fun part. This is the part where it gets messy. And let me grab a spoon. Set one out. Most people are going to want to mix this with a spoon. I don't blame them. And what you're going to do is just mix it until it's pretty well incorporated. You don't want any stray dry flour floating around in here if you can help it. At this point, this is going to make a really, really sticky dough. And a lot of people are going to go, oh, I haven't added enough flour. And that would be a mistake. This is kind of I hesitate to call it a ciabatta recipe. It's kind of a hybrid ciabatta, which in order to get the kind of big airy holes, you have to have a pretty wet dough. So at this point, you want to be careful not to incorporate any more flour. And also, at least for this stage, not to incorporate any more water, so your hands are going to get a little sticky. I do like to do this by hand. You can do this in a machine if you've got it. Just doing it by hand, it gives me a little better feel for whether the little bits of starter have been thoroughly incorporated. Those have developed a little bit more, and they'll feel a little more firm and springy, and you kind of want to work this until it's pretty smooth. And notice I'm stretching it pretty good as I do this. But also, as the dough rises, and we'll go through several stages of rising and folding, which is different from kneading, but as the dough rises, it's going to kind of it's a wet enough dough, it's going to kind of do some self-kneading as it goes. That feels pretty good. You want all that starter dough incorporated and spread pretty evenly throughout, and that spreads the yeast content. If you want to cut in and see the picture. Now what I like to do at this stage, I do like to get all the little bits of dough off my fingers. Now this is not understand this is not a gigantic loaf of bread this is going to make. Bigger than what would go on a loaf pan, but still not huge. So we'll scrape down the sides of the bowl. And once that's been pretty well incorporated, something I like to do that just makes life a little easier later is I like to give the bowl a little spritz of water. Not oil, there's no oil in this recipe. But that water will help later to be able to get up underneath the dough. So that was step 2. I'm going to leave this and let this rise. Depending on, it's pretty cool in our house this morning, about 65 degrees, so it's going to probably take it a couple of hours until it's ready for the next step. But the next step will be, I will take it and I will do a gentle folding, and that's just basically stretching the dough. Pushes a little bit of the built up gas out of it, but not all of it. I'll do that, I'll spritz it with water, cover it, let it rise again, I'll fold it again, and then after that we'll be ready to bake it about an hour after that second folding. So anyway, we'll post another video, a couple more videos later today to show you how this turned out. So have fun.